Today in my journey through disappearing London, I'm going to be finding out why so many of our locals are closing and what's happening to the legacy of the man that gave us the red phone box. But first, disappearing trades, disappearing congregations and disappearing businesses. And they're all Welsh. 6:30 in the morning, not exactly my time of day. Well, unless I'm on my way home, of course. But if you want to work in the milk trade, this is what you have to do. And Geraint Morgan behind me here, who's already been working for 2 hours. There were once literally hundreds of small dairies run by Welshmen scattered across London. As far as I can make out, Morgan's is the last one delivering milk to the doorstep. We'll be coming back to the story of dairies later, because it's only part of the Welsh saga. Perhaps because they settled so widely, their presence went largely unremarked. But present they once were, and the clues are here to be seen. Once upon a time, this Presbyterian chapel at Lavender Hill by Clapham Junction would have been packed with Welsh men, women and children every Sunday. In the rest of the week, it served as a place where local Welsh people could meet and socialise, proud of their faith, their traditions and their way of life. It's one of the few remaining of the many Welsh chapels built in the 18 and early 1900s, still serving as a place of worship for Welsh Presbyterians, Calvinists and Wesleyans. In many of these chapels, where Welshmen once prayed, today others work, rest and play. This is the chapel at King's Cross, and I've come to meet a pillar of her community and a deacon for 25 years. And how many were there in the heyday of the chapels?
I would think of the ones that I can remember. You know, there must have been, I suppose, about 30. And all of them, of course, very well attended. You know, so well attended, in fact, that, you know, in a chapel like this one, you'd have to pay for your seat. Yes. And then you'd put a little notice up, you know, they'd put a little card up to show that it was your seat, so that nobody else had the nerve to sit in it.
So popular you actually had to, buy your own seat, yes.
Buy your own seat.
Yes.
Yeah, very different now.
It's a bit the other way around
Completely the other way, absolutely.
So how many chapels are left today, as far as you know?
There are about 12 left altogether. Some have joined together so that they, you know, to cooperate with services and things like that. But there are about 12.
And congregationally not quite as packed, and certainly you don't have to buy your seats anymore.
You certainly don't. If you put all the congregations of all those 12 chapels together, it wouldn't fill not one chapel properly.
And what's happened to most of them, as far as you know?
Well, some of them, for instance, the chapel that I used to go to was bought by the Greek Orthodox Church. And some of them have been bought by other sects as well. There's one in Willesden, which was bought by the Buddhists.
The future of this one is in doubt too. The Chinese are showing a good deal of interest. Many of these one-time chapels have taken on a role unimaginable when they were built. This one in Fulham now houses a support centre for people with breast cancer. And this one on the Mile End Road was first turned into a theatre, and now it's a pub. And what about this one then? This used to be one of the biggest. And what is it now? A nightclub, a den of vice and iniquity. And it's run by Australians. The chapels were built, or paid for at any rate, by the increasing number of Welsh people who came to London in the 18th and 19th centuries to look for work or set up businesses. But the Welsh started coming long before that.
Probably the first identifiable group are the drovers, who used to walk their cattle to Smithfield. That's going back to the 13th century. So there was a definite link between Wales and London.
Emrys Jones is a geographer who spent a good deal of his life writing about minorities living in foreign cities. When it occurred to him that as a Welshman living in London, that's just what he was, he decided to write a history of the Welsh who came to start a new life here.
In the 19th century, when there was even greater movement from Wales, particularly because the agriculture was so poor, you have people turning from cattle dealing to dairying and making a tremendous contribution there, and others giving a new twist to the wool trade, which was very important, by opening linen shops in London.
Some of the shops flourished, and by the beginning of the last century occupied the capital's prime sites. The names say it all. In Regent Street, just down from Oxford Circus, Dickens and Jones. In Oxford Street itself, D.H. Evans. At Sloane Square, about as posh as you can get, Peter Jones. One of the biggest of all was Jones Brothers on the Holloway Road, where the top 3 floors housed 250 of its 500 employees. Today, only one corner of the original building remains and now houses a supermarket. 100 years ago, it sold everything from a hat pin to a grand piano. It distributed a catalogue with 2,000 illustrations and delivered goods free, horse-drawn of course, to any part of London. For the staff, there were libraries and concerts, so the men and women recently up from Wales could better themselves. The stores have seen mixed fortunes, but there was one business peculiar to Welsh endeavour that has almost entirely disappeared.
At one period in the 1830s, 40s, the most popular person on the street vendors, was the Welsh milk girl carrying milk around the streets. From that, they started to settle in small dairies. They'd have the cattle in yards behind the dairy, so there'd be absolutely fresh milk. And eventually they took over to the extent that by the 20th century, there was something like 700 Welsh dairies in London.
The corner dairy selling butter and cheese as well as milk became almost as commonplace as the corner pub. There was no part of London that didn't have a Welsh dairy nearby. Eventually, they sold more and more in the way of general groceries, got rid of the cows and got their milk from a central depot. And so the corner shop was born. Jones by the Flower Market at Columbia Road still sells many of the things it would have done back when it was owned by Mr. Jones. But down the side, in the stalls where the cows were kept, right up until the Second World War, is now a little pavement cafe. And very nice it is too. Lloyd's in Amwell Street, to the south of Islington, closed 8 years ago. Its new owner is restoring it, and with the help of the Welsh Development Agency, is hoping to open it again as a Welsh dairy. It won't be quite the original without the cows out back, or any milk delivery for that matter, which neatly brings us back to Morgan's. Geraint and his brother Gareth have been running Morgan's Dairy since the mid-70s, when their father decided to take a back seat. Geraint sees himself as Welsh, even though he was born here in Fulham. Back then, there was a traditional dairy shop at the front. That went some years ago.
About 200 yards away from our shop, the first Sainsbury's local opened. And when people told me, oh, there's going to be Sainsbury's at the top of the road, no, what on earth would they want with a small little shop like that? That's ridiculous. But it opened, and overnight it went down ridiculous, 30%. And by the time we closed 4 years later, it was just ridiculous. You know, absolutely, you would not believe it.
The old shop that had been in the family for more than 80 years has become a living room for Geraint's mother and father, who took over the business from a cousin in 1947.
Shelves there, shelves along there, display window here, and the door here.
Great place to live. Lived in a shop, everybody's very envious. Dad used to get up and do the milk round 7 days a week. We used to have the shop, come in, Mum was always there. I never felt like I was a key old kid or anything, because Mum was always there. I remember there with my dad, you know, I'd be out on the road in the middle of winter and I'd always be moaning like most 6 or 7 year olds or 8 year olds, saying, Dad, my hands are cold. And he would say, oh, do this. This was his favourite one. Let the blood go to the end of the hands.
It looks like a hard enough life to me, but it was harder when Ian and his wife Mare were running the place 7 days a week. In those days, the only break they got was after the dairy closed at Sunday lunchtime.
The boys were going to Sunday school. I would go and have my afternoon kip and my wife. That was our break. Sunday afternoon was our break. Then we used to get up about 4 o'clock, 4:30, and then we used to go to chapel. And then we'd go to the Welsh corner in Hyde Park, have a bit of a sing-song and come home.
Hundreds of Welsh people from all across London made their way to Hyde Park every Sunday evening to join in the community singing, complete with conductors, at what they had renamed Welsh Corner.
My sister, actually, who took me there first, when I first came up in 35. Get the 14 bus from Walham Green all the way up to High Park Corner. It was the community centre of the London Welsh, to be quite honest.
The only place Ian gets to sing now is with the disappearing congregation at Lavender Hill. His local chapel at Walham closed years ago. How long Morgan's Dairy will survive is anyone's guess. But of course, not all Welshmen in London were milkmen or shopkeepers. They did their fair share of navvying too, and especially here in Camden Town, where at one point there were 70,000 migrant workmen working on the railways and the canals. And in order to keep these rather boisterous young men apart of an evening, they were all designated their own pubs. And this is the Welsh one, the Carnarvon Castle. For the English, there was the Windsor Castle. For your Scotsmen, the Edinburgh Castle. And later in the programme, we'll be going to my particular favourite, the Dublin Castle. There used to be thousands of these fabulous red phone boxes all over London. But of course, some clever person came along and decided they could invent a better one. They didn't, but that doesn't mean they haven't got rid of most of them, and that's a scandal. And these are the things that are replacing our dear old phone box. Goodness knows who thought we might prefer them. Or was it just me? I thought I'd ask a few people which they liked.
The old one, definitely.
Oh, the old red ones.
Definitely the old red telephone.
Ones, yeah, definitely. Much better. The old one. Everyone prefers the old one, don't they?
Definitely the red. No, it's old, it's nice, it's classic, and it's like Ferrari. And I love Ferrari.
The red phone box was the work of a man who was to leave his mark on London in many ways. Giles Gilbert Scott was actually an architect who built some of the capital's biggest buildings. But when the GPO wanted a new phone box in 1925, he and a number of other leading architects were asked to submit designs for a competition. At the back of the National Gallery, the full-scale mock-ups of the entries, now long gone, were lined up for the judges to see. The winner was the K2. It was a bit expensive to make, so it only went up in London. The K6 was introduced 10 years later to celebrate King George's Silver Jubilee. By now, Giles was Sir Giles. Right, I'm going to tell you the difference between a K2 and a K6 so that you need never again suffer those embarrassing gaps in conversations when you can't think of anything to say. The K2 has little square windows, where the K6 has wide ones with a little one either side. The K2 is taller and has a crown cut into the top, where the K6 has a gold painted one that sticks out. Oh, and K2 stands for Kiosk 2 because it's the second design that the GPO used. Believe me, you will survive without knowing about Ks 3 to 5. One thing I wouldn't mind betting on is that this thing will never end up on a tourist postcard. For an architect, a phone box is quite a small thing to design. For Sir Giles, it was especially so because his was some of the biggest buildings in London. But like the phone box, some of them are in danger of disappearing. This is the Guinness Building at Park Royal in Acton, built between 1933 and 1936. The company that owns it wants to knock it down and has been given permission to do so. People from the 20th Century Society and other conservation groups are up in arms. They say it's one of the finest examples of industrial architecture of its time, and to destroy it would be Philistine. Even if it doesn't appeal to everyone, it's still sad to see it go. Like many of Sir Giles's industrial buildings, the final appearance was the result of a collaboration between him and the engineering types whose job it was to design a structure that would serve the purpose required. Gilbert Scott's most important contribution was the brickwork covering the steel frame. Much admired though it may be, there must be millions of Londoners who've never even seen it, or even a picture of it. You couldn't say that about another of the great man's buildings, Battersea Power Station. If something isn't done soon, this once most famous electricity generating station in Britain will be beyond saving. When building began in the early 30s, a little before the Guinness factory was started, there were objections that it was too close to central London and fears that pollution from its 350-foot chimneys would damage the capital's historic buildings. But once up, it soon became a favourite London landmark. It was closed down well over 20 years ago, and since then, the local authorities, planners, developers and speculators have argued about what to do with the fast-decaying building. The chimneys are in such a bad state that they're going to have to come down. The current plan is to spend £10 million putting up replicas in their place. I suppose the next proposal will be to build a giant plastic copy of the whole thing. If the latest plans to turn the site into a leisure complex fall through, you have to wonder if this old friend will survive. There is proof that a giant structure like this can have a useful existence. One part at least of the Gilbert Scott legacy seems assured. 3 miles downstream stands another of Sir Giles's power stations, Bankside. Today it's home to the Tate Modern. Ironic that one of the fears back in the 30s about Battersea was that the pollution would damage the paintings at the original Tate Gallery. Sir Giles, who was in his late 60s before work began at Bankside, promised he could create a power station that was beautiful, a cathedral of power opposite the spiritual cathedral, St Paul's. This is where the great turbines stood that created the energy that pulsed through London City. Work didn't begin until the late 1940s and wasn't finished until 1963, by which time poor old Sir Giles was dead. When Bankside closed less than 20 years later, it was left looking for someone to take it on. For the Tate Gallery, it offered something it couldn't find anywhere else.
This is an extraordinary space. It excited the architects who were brought in to transform it. You would never get agreement to build a space like this if you were constructing the building from the ground up.
Yeah.
The walls are not very, very precious inside. We've got MDF in place of just a skeleton that was here internally. And so there's a lot of movement possible, and we can alter the spaces that we have within this shell. It's a shoebox, so it's got a lot of character, and you can play with the inside of it. People like the huge space, definitely, but they like to be here in crowds as well. And recently we had a huge audience who came for one of the installations in this space, lying on the floor and waving their legs and watching their reflections in a mirrored ceiling.
I came to that, yes. I waved my legs with the rest
You
of them.
waved your legs, yes. So you probably spelt out messages to George Bush across the floor when he came to town. So sure. That's what some of our visitors took it upon themselves to do.
So, no longer a cathedral of power, but a palace of the people. Visitors from all over the world now appreciate the magnificence of this piece of Sir Giles Gilbert Scott's work, even if there are others which hang in the balance. If technology and oil prices hadn't made it obsolete, it would be no less a building, but his name would be known by far fewer people. So might mine without my next stop. The Dublin Castle in Camden Town, one of my favourite pubs, not least because it's where Madness plays some of their earliest concerts. You could call it the ancestral seat of madness. This is my kind of pub. It might not be yours. We've all got an idea of what the ideal local would be, but one thing's for sure. As more and more pubs are taken over by the chains, where the drink, the food, the furniture, even the ashtrays are identical, then eventually there won't be any choice left to make. So why do I like this place so much? Well, I'm always made very welcome, and it's still got live music. This is Stray, just one of tonight's bands. And then it's not just some manager behind the bar who can't wait to take the next step up towards a bigger pub. This is family run. The Conlons have been here for more than 30 years. When Henry's parents, Allo and Peggy, first arrived, the music was rather different.
It used to be an Irish house at the beginning. And we used to have music on only about 4 nights a week. Irish bands.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember it was Irish bands because I came here to get one of our first concerts, and we pretended that we played a bit of Irish music ourselves.
You told me lies.
You told white lies.
Yeah.
That was 1979.
A long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, the story was to be a publican in them days. You had to be able to drink a few pints, but still be able to throw people out at the end of the night.
People out, yeah. And they used to give them a few wallops, you know. They'd be able to, but it used to be only a fist fight. It was totally different, you know. In the back room there, we had weddings on every Saturday of the year.
Yeah.
And food used to be packed out here lunchtime.
Yeah. That was back in the 70s when Camden Town's pubs were mostly full of Irishmen, and it hadn't yet become a smart place to come and eat. Today, the only thing you can get at the Dublin Castle is a bag of crisps. It's just not worth the effort of trying to compete with the multitude of restaurants and bars. This one, a few yards down the road, was once the Windsor Castle pub. And it's not the only old-fashioned watering hole to have disappeared round here. It seems almost anywhere is under threat.
All these pubs, they are in the hubs of our community, and many people still use them as their meeting places, where they have their weddings, where they have their parties, their 21st, their 18th birthday parties, and their wakes, ultimately, you know.
There are half a dozen pubs within walking distance that have closed or are under threat. The old College Arms is just a hole in the ground. And what makes it even worse for me is that some of them are music pubs.
Sadly, yeah. Developers come in, buy up pubs, turn them into flats, and what can we do, you know? It seems to be, for some reason, economically unviable. And as the pubs are becoming less and less profitable, you know, big companies are coming in, buying up the pubs. You're seeing the homogenisation of our high streets. More and more pub chains are coming in. We're getting more themed pubs, more polished bars, more bar staff in designer outfits.
Don't worry about that. London is an ever-changing, amorphous mass of people, and it's getting more and more homogenised by the second. But pubs like this, where bands can get their first break, and people can come and meet and share the most important parts of their life, will still be a very important hub of the community. It'd be very sad to see any more of them go. So here's to them, and long may they reign. Next time on Disappearing London, I take the air with one of London's last rag and bone men. I head up west to visit an old-style hatter and sample the delights of a 50s coffee house.